Hello, everyone, to Positive Technologies 2023, a conference aimed at exchanging technological knowledge and supporting the IT community. This event is hosted by the Invest in Poznań office of the city of Poznań, and my name is Tomasz Orzechowski. I'm a VP of Program Board. With me is John Paul Farmer, former CTO of New York City, former advisor of Barack Obama, and current president of Willings. Nice to have you, John. It's a pleasure.
It is terrific to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thanks a lot. We have a great community of engineers here, and we made a research throughout, and we have a couple of questions regarding our subject. The subject everyone is focused this year, the AI subject. So we are really interested in your experiences in that field. So hopefully we have a nice chat here.
Well, thank you so much. And honestly, I think speaking to the community in Poland is such a treat. I've had a chance to visit on 3 different occasions, have a number of Polish friends who I get to keep up with online and when they're visiting the United States. And I hope to be with you in person sometime soon, because this topic is everywhere. Artificial intelligence has really taken the world by storm. And it's that old saying, it's an overnight success, decades in the making, because the reality is artificial intelligence as a field has been around since the mid 20th century. And even neural networks, a bunch of the concepts have been around. It's really just the pieces have come into place. And then, of course, with ChatGPT and generative AI, the public awareness has really grown substantially this year. So I think it's a critical topic, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you and the community.
True. But you have a great experience as the Chief Technology Officer of New York City. You led the development of NYC AI strategy at the time when few other cities were focused on the issue. So what was your experience? What did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, happy to discuss that. And I think it's helpful to even start before that about why did I even become CTO of New York City? And I'll start by referencing a really terrific book called The Triumph of the City by Edward Glaeser. And in it, Mr. Glaeser argues that cities are humanity's greatest invention. Cities are where innovation happens. Cities are, when you look at the numbers, where people get healthier, safer, better educated. Life gets better. Progress is made in cities. And we hit a really critical milestone, according to the UN, in the last decade, which is that a majority of human beings, the majority of people now live in cities. And that was never the case in all of human history. Well, now it's a majority of people, and it's going to be 75% in our lifetimes. So these urbanization trends globally mean that increasingly urban problems and challenges, that's synonymous. It means the same thing as human problems and challenges. Which then brings us to artificial intelligence. And when I was talking to the mayor of New York City back in 2019 about potentially taking on the role of chief technology officer, I said, this is something that's really important. We've got to get ready for these emerging technologies. They're going to play really huge roles in everyday life, and artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and a few others. And I proposed developing forward-looking strategies to ensure that New York City was ready for the way these new technologies could be used inside government, yes, but also how they would be used in everyday life in ways that are both visible and invisible to the everyday person. So that's what I went in planning to do. And when I got into the role as CTO, I chaired a multi-agency technology committee. We created a facial recognition technology working group. We had pieces underway when the pandemic hit and obviously disrupted a lot of things, and led us as the city's tech team to spring into action, trying to deal with shortages of supplies, to predict where the next shortages of whether they were gloves or masks or sadly body bags would be during that pandemic. In some ways, that showed the mayor, the deputy mayors, the leadership of the city, how powerful data, predictive analytics, and artificial intelligence could be. So as we came out of the pandemic, we were able to create the New York City AI strategy. And we had looked at what nation states had done, where around the world, a number of countries had developed their own AI strategies, but cities generally had not. And go back in time to when the city state was preeminent, and the city state was what drove things. Well, the world has changed. Now, obviously, it's a world of nation states. It's a world of multilateral institutions like the United Nations. And in that context, it makes sense. The nation states have led the way here, but there's still a really important role for cities to play. When you look at New York City specifically, now I'm a New Yorker. We like to say it's the greatest city in the world. I'll say it's one of the greatest cities in the world here. I think we can all agree on that. It's a fantastic place. It's a place of incredible diversity, vibrancy, economic growth. The economy in the New York metro area is, I believe, 11th largest in the world if it were its own country. So it's a really massive part of the global economy. It's a place where a lot happens. It's a place where people come and connect, whether they live here, whether they're just visiting. So it's a place that matters. And we felt like by moving to do something to prepare for artificial intelligence in a thoughtful way, we could not only help New York City and New Yorkers and the people who touch life here in New York City, but we could also play a role in sharing some best practices, concepts, and frameworks with cities around the world. And when it came time to develop the New York City AI strategy, we were fortunate to be able to hire fantastic talent. It was led by a PhD in machine learning from Stanford University, who'd also been an entrepreneur and started a machine learning company that he'd sold. So somebody who had great experience in the private sector, in academia, and now in government, who was able to shepherd this multi-agency, really in-depth and thoughtful approach. So when you ask about what is the AI strategy, we started with actually an AI primer, even before we got to the strategy. And the point of the AI primer was to say, we recognize that this is a concept that a lot of people have heard about, but very few people in positions of power are actually deeply knowledgeable about. So let's make sure we set a baseline of understanding of what is AI, what isn't. How does artificial intelligence, as a really a new way of doing software programming, how does that compare to classical programming, where in classical programming, you input data and rules and you get answers? Well, with machine learning, you're inputting answers and data, and you're then producing rules that can be applied over and over again. And so help people just wrap their head around what this really is, separate from hyperbole, separate from clickbait on the internet, something that could really just be grounding. Once we'd done that, we then followed with the actual strategy. And the New York City AI strategy, which I'd encourage anybody to go check out and read, it was developed in collaboration with over 50 different organizations. So not done in a silo, not done in isolation, done in collaboration with academics, with technologists, but also with community-based organizations that had a real interest and real concern about how this technology would affect their lives, affect labor markets, a bunch of questions that people understandably have about any new technology, and certainly a technology that is, or suite of technologies, I should say, that are as powerful as what we call artificial intelligence. So there were 5 things that we ultimately recommended or really zeroed in on in the New York City AI strategy. And these are again, I think, applicable to everyone. So the first is, let's document the use cases of what's going on already, because the reality is when you are a big organization, whether you are a government like New York City that's been around for several hundred years and has over 100 different offices and departments and agencies, or whether you're a company, there are pockets of people who are more forward leaning, who are experimenting, who are trying new things. And you need to identify where those pockets are, one, to make sure that what they're doing is indeed appropriate and correct. But then when you find those great things, you want to share those. So identifying the really replicable and important use cases that were already underway even before we created an AI strategy. And I'll give you just a few examples of what those look like, because they're very different from one another. One example is really straightforward, really simple. It's anomaly detection. So something that's out of whack, that doesn't look right with the historical data. And so in this case, the anomaly detection that was being conducted was on energy bills. So the city department that pays the energy bills, I believe it's 15,000 energy bills every month. They had a job where they had to go through these reams of paper every month and look for charges that looked too high. because they didn't want to waste the taxpayer money by paying too much for the energy. Well, it turns out that's really hard to do, and human beings aren't that great at it. You kind of zone out when you're going through thousands and thousands of lines of numbers. The machines are better than us. And so some simple machine learning techniques were able to detect $5 million a year in savings for the city of New York, just by identifying where there was a mistake in the heating or the cooling bills for the buildings that New York City operates. So that's a really straightforward anomaly detection, very replicable in a lot of different ways, public sector or private sector. Now, the next example is one where you really need to have artificial intelligence, and that's cybersecurity. Because if the bad guys are using AI and you're not, you're at a huge disadvantage. New York City created NYC Cyber Command, where we had an incredible team of people, great talent in-house in government, working with private sector tools, and then using those private sector tools to train their models, really robust models, because these models needed to assess and detect inappropriate activity on the New York City web surface, the attack surface of the New York City web. So they were monitoring, I'm trying to get the numbers right and remember, I believe it is 8 billion events per day, which works out to hundreds of thousands of events per second. Human beings simply cannot do that. And so if you're not using artificial intelligence in this way, then you're leaving yourself vulnerable to any sophisticated cyber attacker. So those are a couple of examples of things that we found that were already happening that we wanted to share and make people aware of. We also found examples where personally identifiable information was involved. Somebody's health data or somebody's address or someone's personal information. And that's a lot more sensitive. And it requires a different level of scrutiny when you're dealing with those use cases. It does not say that you shouldn't do them. You just have to be incredibly thoughtful and incredibly careful how you do them. So the first thing was to identify these use cases and then see what was out there and start inventorying and sharing them. The second thing was really figuring out a data strategy, because the reality is a government like New York City that's been around for hundreds of years, where different agencies were created at different times along the way. Some of them have great data strategies. Some of them don't. Some of them have great data practices. Some of them don't. So the reality is when you're talking about AI and these systems, there's the saying, garbage in, garbage out. So if your data is not good, if it's not representative, if it's not clean, you're going to have trouble getting the outcomes that you want. And so coming up with a comprehensive modern data strategy for any organizations looking to use artificial intelligence is really, really key. And that's not easy to do. It's much easier said than done. But that's, I think, work that we all have to do. The third thing that we recommended to focus on here is procurement. So figuring out, since most tools will not be built in-house, they will be purchased and then applied, making sure that the people doing those procurements, who in many cases are not AI or machine learning experts, that they've got the ability to ask the right questions. They've got the checklist to detect something as a miss or to confirm that something seems to be right. And then they've also got a place to go to get advice when a question is kind of beyond their pay grade as a non-AI expert. So really thinking about how we purchase and acquire AI tools to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is, doing right by the taxpayers who are footing the bill, but also doing right to ensure that we're using these tools ethically and not doing something that could cause problems down the road. The fourth area that we identified here with the AI strategy is partnerships. Because no matter how good a job we do building up talent, as we've been doing here in New York City inside of government, we know that the vast majority of talent will be outside of government. There's this great saying from Bill Joy, who was one of the founders of Sun Microsystems. And one day in a meeting, he said, no matter who you are, what organization you are, most of the smartest people work for somebody else. Most of the smartest people work for somebody else. And so it's really important to figure out, how do you build those pathways for information sharing? How do you build partnerships with universities or businesses or others who have brilliant, talented people that you could benefit from as a city and as a government? And then the fifth area that was really critical to us is centering the protection of digital rights. So these are human rights in the digital age, in this AI age, where obviously privacy is the one that gets talked about the most, but it's not the only one. There are other rights that we care about, like accountability, transparency, equity. And sometimes these rights can be in tension with one another. Because if you maximize for privacy, for example, without any concern for these other digital rights, well, you can actually prevent the data sets from representing historically marginalized communities. And you can lead to outcomes that are actually really, really negative for wide groups of people.
Sorry about
I'm
it.
glad. Look, I'm glad your cat wants to hear the conversation as well. That's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
one more
sorry
member of
about
the
it.
audience. So these digital rights are so important because you've got to figure out how to balance them. Because it's not as easy as simply saying yes, turn them all up to 100 on the scale. You've got to figure out what's appropriate and what's appropriate in different contexts. So those 5 things: inventorying the use cases, developing a really high quality data strategy. 3, identifying how to improve procurement. 4, partnerships with external entities. And then 5, digital rights. Those are the things that we really focused on. And I'll tell you 2 additional things that aren't in the strategy. If we'd had more time in office before a new mayor came in and there was turnover, or if the pandemic hadn't interrupted us, 2 other things would have happened, which could have been really transformative and could still happen.
But you never
and are
know.
being discussed. Sorry?
But you never know. How do you know that would have happened?
Well, we had 2 things that we were working on that we got really close to getting done, and we just ran out of time. So one of them is a bill of digital rights. So enshrining New York City, for example, like a lot of cities or countries, have human rights laws. And those laws were generally developed before the internet age. And so with new technologies, ensuring that it's clear what rights people have when they're using technology or when technology is being used on them, because it's not always a choice. If you walk into a retail store and they're using facial recognition technology, or you go to visit your grandmother at her apartment building and there's facial recognition technology to walk in the door, that's a real question about what consent do you have as an individual. It's one thing if you're choosing to use something, it's another thing if the choice is being made for you. And so this bill of digital rights to ensure that people have their rights protected to make the choices they want to make is something that's really powerful and being pursued now by some countries. We didn't quite get it done here in New York City. And then the last thing is a digital rights protection bureau. Because when you think about how government enforces rules, which might be on the books already, or they might be created in the next year or 2 with a bunch of the regulatory activity, you've got to have people with the expertise who understand the technology, understand how it's being applied. This is fundamentally different from inspecting a construction work site and making sure that everyone's wearing their helmet. That's important to do. Let's make sure everyone's being safe on the construction work site. This is a different animal. It's a different beast. And so a digital rights protection bureau would be custom built to bring in the talent to ensure that people's rights indeed are protected and that there aren't loopholes that are being exploited. So those are a couple things that we were deep on the path toward creating, but just ran out of time. But still, I think some pretty interesting ideas that other people are now pursuing.
Well, that sounds really interesting in terms of human rights, human digital rights, cybersecurity, and creating a better environment for citizens to live. And obviously, New York highlights the example on the very global scale. However, I'm wondering how can others, maybe even Polish cities like my hometown, Krakow, where we have met actually, or my second home, Poznań, where I live now, can learn from New York City's approach to AI?
I think all of the things I've mentioned so far are relevant to everybody. And I recognize that not every city has the resources in-house, has the budget, has the technical expertise on staff to start from scratch. But I think that people can take what we've done here in New York City and what others have done in the last few years and then build on that. There's a fantastic organization that I had the pleasure of co-chairing when I was CTO of New York City called the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights. This is now over 60 cities worldwide, most of them in Europe. I co-chaired this with Amsterdam and Barcelona. And it was really about sharing. It's about, look, if we all go reinvent the wheel, that's just a big waste of time and energy. Let's work together. Let's build upon each other's efforts and successes. And so I think that's what we've done here in New York is provide something that's relevant to New Yorkers, improves their lives, but also in some ways a gift that we are sharing with everyone else around the world to take with, take what they see fit. It's not that every single element of this the 100+ pages here are going to make sense in Poznań or Krakow or Warsaw. But there's an opportunity to take a look and say, yes, like we can build on this. We can start from what's been done already in New York and then customize that for our local needs. The great thing about being here in 2023 is we no longer have to convince people that this issue matters. I remember back in 2019 and 2020 trying to convince folks that, hey, AI isn't just some wonky topic that techies are talking about. This is actually affecting people's lives already then, and it's going to just affect people's lives more and more. Well, ChatGPT solved that problem for us. It really kind of grabbed people's imagination, has shown people what's possible. And of course, a lot of people now think that generative AI is AI. And in reality, it's a subfield. It's an important one, but it's out there. There's so many other applications that are, again, already underway in organizations large and small. And as I've said, some of these are invisible. Some of these you don't know about. Let me give an example on the hiring front. So when people are applying for jobs, you often don't know how decisions are being made about, do you get an interview? Who gets hired? What are they making these decisions based on? Well, there are a lot of laws on the books already that you can't discriminate based on, someone's gender or their race or a variety of other things. But how do you enforce that when there's no visibility, there's no transparency into the tools that are being used? Well, here in New York, the city legislature passed a law saying that has to be transparent, that if AI is used in the process of reviewing your resume or analyzing the video of your interview, any of these different ways, it has to be revealed to you as an applicant so that you know that. And if you have a complaint or a concern that's being done inappropriately, you've got the ability to actually go to the city or your government and make that known and see if there was something that they can identify that was done inappropriately. The other element here, which is something that's not just about hiring, it's really taken off as an industry, cottage industry already, is AI auditing, algorithmic auditing. So how do you make sure that the tools that are being used are appropriate, weren't trained on data sets that are not representative, that take or bring bias with them that's inappropriate? And so AI audits are required by this new law in New York City to happen once a year for businesses that are using AI tools in the hiring process. So it's not a ban, and I think this is important. It's not saying you can't use these things. It's saying people have to be aware. They have to have the ability for recourse if something illegal or inappropriate is done. And you as a business have a responsibility to stay up to date and make sure that you understand how your tools are working, that they are working without undue bias, and that they're treating folks fairly. One additional element that's really come into play in the last few months is red teaming. So it's been done before in traditional software development. There's a lot more of it happening now with AI, where businesses are really trying to ensure safety and appropriateness of their models before releasing. I'll give you a quick example of something that happened when I was at Microsoft, where Microsoft released a chatbot. I'm trying to remember the year. It must have been 2017, 2018. So fairly early on, a chatbot called Tay. And in a lot of ways, it was really cutting edge. It was really very cool. The capabilities, the way it could feel like you were talking to a human, which I think a lot of folks now kind of take for granted with the progress that's been made. But a handful of years ago, that was really a breakthrough. However, it was training itself on the conversations it had on the data that it received. And so really quickly, within 24 hours, bad actors started entering data and prompts that were racist, were misogynistic, and that started producing then content coming out of the chatbot that was racist and misogynistic as well. So that ended up with a major global company, Microsoft, a lot of egg on their face, trying to figure out, how did this happen? How didn't they see this coming? And that's where today a lot of companies are saying, you know what, we're going to really invest in red teaming because it's not only the right thing to do for society, it's actually the smart thing to do from a business standpoint, because we don't want to be in a situation where we have some kind of embarrassment, or worse yet, some kind of legal liability for what the tools that we've put out have made. So when I think back to your question about what is it that Polish cities in particular can look to New York or the other things going on in the world to learn from, I I think it's important to note what's happening in Europe versus what's happening in the United States or elsewhere. In Europe, the AI Act has really taken a risk-based framework. In the US, it's a different story. It's still developing in the US. We're a couple of years behind where the EU is. And understandably, because of traditions, culture, just the economy here in the States, we take some different, make some different choices. And so it's still to be decided exactly how the US model looks at the nation state level. But in the local context, we've been able to say, look, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where snow removal happens. Cities do that. It's not the national governments. This is where restaurant inspections occur to make sure that people's food is healthy. This is where people go to jail. This is where bail and bond is set when someone's waiting for their trial to happen. A bunch of these things that are critical to someone's life happen at the local level. And so those are the things where I think, despite, I wouldn't call them disagreements, but different approaches at the national or continental levels, we're able to say, let's do some local city to city learning, because we actually face a lot of the exact same challenges and problems. And the tools that we're going to use to solve them are going to be, if not the same, at least very similar.
Well, talking about the challenges, you just touched the base with the next question I wanted to ask, which is about the regulatory. With 2023, where AI has just exploded into the public consciousness, and how has this front page coverage affected the regulation, the AI regulation? You mentioned we do have some Europe you trying to develop in states, but there has been a burst of activities. Do you think the regulatory process is working right now or off track?
It's a good question. I think the good news is, whether you're talking to people in government or people in the private sector, people recognize that regulation now is important. This isn't something that won't be regulated. It's going to happen. The question is how. In the United States, you've had Chuck Schumer as the leader of the Senate majority in our legislature. He's done a lot of convenings with the big name brand companies. You've had a number of groups bringing together folks who are focused on ethics and ensuring that the way AI is deployed is fair and responsible. And then just recently, actually in the same week, you had a flurry of activity where in the United States, President Biden issued an executive order on artificial intelligence that is robust, very, very large, much more comprehensive than a typical executive order. Now, an executive order is not law, so there's a difference. It doesn't have the strength of law, but it's kind of the next best thing or next biggest thing that a U.S. government can do. And so that is really comprehensive. And it builds on some work that the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and what's called NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which are a couple of key bodies here in the United States, what they'd done previously through a framework for an AI Bill of Rights. So I mentioned the Bill of Rights idea previously. Well, they did some work in the last year on that. That's really good and really cutting edge. And now they're building on this as part of this larger EO. But the EO also really focuses on national competitiveness. It focuses on bioweapons. It focuses on some of the threats associated with AI. And there are some kind of funny cutoffs that have been made where, for example, the U.S. government needs to know about any models that are trained using massive compute power. And here again, they're worried about cybersecurity. They're worried about bioweapons, things of that nature. And they decided that 10 to the 26 integer is the compute power cutoff. That's kind of an arbitrary number. That's not a special number, but they had to decide on something, and they said, well, this is the cutoff for now. Now, the reality is, as time goes by, the appropriateness of that cutoff is going to change, because this field is developing so fast and changing so fast that it's going to be important for the United States or anybody to update these hardwired decisions and hardwired thresholds that they're putting in. So there are a bunch of things like that mean this EO that came out recently is really important, but also needs to change. It needs to keep moving, because it's not, the way it's written now, capable of staying static and not negatively impacting the industry and its development. And that's a complaint that some folks in the private sector have, which is that, hey, we get it, you need to regulate us, but how you regulate us really, really matters, especially at this fairly nascent stage of the AI boom. Now, there's something else that the United States has done, which is really smart, which is a talent surge. When I was in the White House, I was able to work in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and I co-founded and led something called the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program. And then I architected something called 18F, which is a digital service agency across the US government. And then from that, the US Digital Service and a whole network. So from those things, thousands of different technologists over the last decade have come into the US government to lend their hand. These are data scientists, these are engineers and developers and entrepreneurs of various sorts. Well, now they're going to focus on an AI surge through these pathways into government service. And other countries have done similar things in the last decade. So in France, the Entrepreneur d'Intérêt Général, Germany, Tech for Germany, Poland, GovTech, Singapore has their own GovTech, also using the same name. So there are these pathways that have been created to bring technologists in. And I think we're likely to see something similar in a lot of countries to what the US is doing, which is saying, we know we need to bring in talent. We know the traditional way of hiring in government often isn't fast enough or nimble enough, or in some way dissuades top technical talent. Well, right now, there's not enough AI talent to go around. So you've got to figure out how to make it really attractive. And these programs can do that. Maybe they won't be commensurate paying the same as the private sector opportunities, but they certainly bring a lot in terms of a mission and a lot of fulfillment and psychic rewards in doing the work. And if they can get in the same ballpark of the kind of compensation someone would get in the private sector, even if it's lower, but it's not, a fraction of what they would get in the private sector, then you're going to see a lot of people who want to be a part of ensuring that government regulation in this day and age is done appropriately, is done in an informed way, and is done in a way that really does prevent potential harms while not blocking all the good things that can come out of the growth of the AI industry. So let me also say, at the same time that the US has been doing all this work, literally the same week, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom hosted an AI safety summit. There were things going on in France. So there's just so much activity. There's this boom of conversations around how AI will be regulated. And it's not just in Europe and the US. Those are the two that we talk about the most. But look, China's got a very different vision for what AI should be. Who should control it, how centralized power should be in society. And so there's a Chinese model that is and will be exported to countries that want to be a part of that type of system. Interestingly enough, there's an alternative that's also underway, which is in the United Arab Emirates, where the UAE is putting a lot of investment behind the idea of being an alternative to all of those other models. And it's, I think at this point, still a bit unclear exactly how they will differentiate. You're going to have a more centralized state power model in China with very little respect for digital rights. In EU, you're going to have a big focus on risk and probably rights as well. In the States, you're going to have some mix, some kind of balanced model that tries to empower the private sector while also ensuring a certain level of oversight by government. I think it's still TBD. What is that other model that the United Arab Emirates envisions? But we're at a really interesting moment now where AI regulation is a hot topic, and everybody's talking about it, and everyone's trying to figure it out. The EU has been the earliest mover here, but others are catching up. And ultimately, we're not going to end up with a monolithic regulatory environment. It's going to vary, and because the technology is evolving so quickly, what I think is really important is to ensure that our regulatory approach doesn't sit back and do nothing, but does something, measures the impact of it, understands what's happening because of these regulatory rules and laws that are being put in place, and then makes updates and edits. And I think that nimble, agile regulatory process is going to be really critical when you're dealing with a technological revolution that is also nimble, agile, and fast moving.
Well, agree. What I find personally fascinating about AI is that we are actually experiencing something different, maybe for a very first time in a human history. our like knowledge and development has been built on empirism so far, where we actually knew what's going to happen because it has been based on experience, on example. And with AI, the things are slightly different. There is a kind of unknown factor, even like to the creators. How does it work from inside and where that would go? So even some big names, like ranging from Elon Musk to Jeffrey Hinton, they have recently raised the alarm about AI being a threat to humanity itself, as it's kind of unknown factor there. So others disagree. What is your take on this existential risk posed by artificial intelligence?
Certainly a question a lot of people are talking about, and it's one that's in the headlines a lot. Certainly the news and the papers are covering this a lot. I heard a quote a while back that went something like this. It said, worrying about existential risk from AI or extinction risk from AI is kind of like seeing two children playing in a sandbox and worrying that they're going to create a nuclear weapon. I can't say they won't. Maybe down the line, maybe it will go that way. But I think it really overstates and kind of shows some maybe hubris. We are so early in this process with artificial intelligence. And we, as you pointed out, frankly, we do know so little that we're still those children in the sandbox. So we're pretty far away from extinction level weapons that would get out of control. And a lot of people, think that we've got a lot of time to figure that out. So if that is an issue, which maybe it is, maybe it isn't, it's a ways away. Now, when you think about the people who are going out and talking about this issue of existential risk, you've got two different camps. You've got folks like Jeffrey Hinton, who was previously the chief scientist at Google. He was something high up at Google. He's a pioneer in the neural network space, a Canadian computer scientist. He's coming from a place, I think, where he honestly is worried. He's toward the end of his career. He's contributed a lot to this field, and he sees some things that are concerning to him. And I think that we should think about that and be aware of folks like that and take that into account without stopping all the progress that's going on. Now you've got other people like maybe Elon Musk, other kind of pioneers in industry, moguls, where they've got an express interest in scaring people because they've got companies that already are ahead in this race. Whether you're talking about the big tech companies, or you're talking about OpenAI, which is obviously newer, or X.AI is Elon's company. So you've got folks like that who are in some ways trying to distract from the very real harms that are here today. So they're saying, I imagine a harm that is so terrible far in the future, but that's what you should focus on. That's what all the conversations, the articles, the congressional testimony, all that stuff, the laws should be focused on this thing that could happen maybe possibly decades from now, as opposed to the stuff that's happening today. Because there are real harms today in the way artificial intelligence is developed and deployed. The reality is when we human beings build these tools, we encode our own biases. We encode our own experiences. So basically, whatever ills we have in society, that's the data that's being used to train these models. And so these models then are perpetuating a lot of these inequities, these harms. So when you think about who's underrepresented in the data, it's people of color, it's younger people, it's older people, it's people with disabilities. It's the same groups that have historically been under-resourced. And so we, I think, have a duty to help the people who are actually being hurt today. When facial recognition technology doesn't work, when it misidentifies somebody because it's much, much less accurate based on the color of their skin, and that person then gets arrested and put in prison, loses their job because they couldn't show up for work. Those are real harms that are happening today. They're not imaginary. Imaginary is not the right word. They're not hypothetical. They're very real. And so I think we've got a responsibility to focus on those harms today to make sure that we are being true to those digital rights that I've talked about, where equity and accountability. So the folks who build these tools or deploy these tools are accountable for what's happening and why the decisions are being made. They've got a responsibility to figure that out and then fix it. An example in the United States that's kind of well known is where a certain jurisdiction was using AI a few years ago to set bail when somebody was arrested. And they said, well, we don't use race. Race is not a factor here. This is race blind. But they did use zip code. And the reality is, in this day and age, zip code in many, many cities is still, the zip code, of course, is kind of the postal code, the hyper-local postal code. Where you live is often representative of, your race, ethnicity, immigrant status. And so it really actually just uses a proxy and uses these data points that are frankly illegal and unethical to use. And so that's the reason that we need to have this transparency and this accountability to make sure it doesn't happen. And that's why I think those are the conversations that we should be centering right now around harm reduction, because we know we can do it. If we put our minds to it, we can do it. And we don't need to say, we don't need to ban AI. We don't need to say stop the progress on disease treatment breakthroughs or even something as simple as fighting poaching in parks or dealing with climate change through some really sophisticated models. We don't need to stop those things. We simply need to be really thoughtful about the data that we're using, the algorithms, who created these things, who's missing from the conversation, and then do the work to right those wrongs.
Right. To get a kind of takeaway from this, I really like a sandbox metaphor. As cities, they do are sandboxes like for thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people. So in that sense, how the cities or the cities leaderships should be concerned. I mean, what is something you would like to see every city do?
That's a good question. I mean, I think a bunch of the things that we've been able to do here in New York City are examples of what can be done. If I'm picking just a couple, then I'd say a data strategy is critical for everybody, because you can buy all kinds of great tools, but if your data that you're trying to then put into these tools and create outputs, if it's flawed, if it's not representative, it's simply not going to lead to the outcomes that you want to see. And so it's not as it's hard work. It takes time, and it's not snapping your fingers and then having a press conference about how you're using AI to save humanity. But it's the hard work. It's the hard work that has to happen behind the scenes to put yourself in a position as a community, as a city, as a government, to make the most of these tools and to do it in the right way. And so I think that's the number one thing that I would recommend everybody do. Now, the second thing is this focus on digital rights, because it's very easy. It's very easy to be one-sided and only look at the positives that come from AI. It's attractive. It's just we all want to believe that technology is helping improve lives. But the reality is that who wields this power matters. And artificial intelligence can be a very centralizing tool for power. And these are, as Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, has written a book called Tools and Weapons. These can be tools and they can be weapons. And we've got to make the choices as democratic societies to ensure that they're tools for the good, and they don't become weapons that centralize power and centralize wealth and end up extracting from the rest of society, because it doesn't need to be that way. These can be really transformative, positive breakthroughs on all kinds of fronts, whether it's education, health, customizing health education treatments, services to individuals. It can really improve life for a lot of people. And that's what we want to see, but it only happens if we make the choices to now protect digital rights. Because if you wait
Right.
10 or 20 years, it's going to be too late. The power will have been centralized, and then the folks, the companies, whoever it might be with that power are not going to want to give it up. I think I'll tell you, I mean, one example is a lot of us probably, if we had to do it over again, wouldn't build the experience of the World Wide Web the way it is as an ad supported experience, where it's a data economy, an attention economy, data extraction, ads being presented. That's the web experience that we have today, and it's because of decisions that were made or not made back in the 1990s, for example. And here we are, and it's really hard to change it once it's in place. And people are trying micropayments and the like. There are people are trying to think about new business models, but you look at the impact that's had on journalism, on information integrity, on elections in democratic nations. And because we have the data economy that we have, we've produced some ills in society. Some good too, but also some ills. Now is the time for us to think about what the AI economy is going to look like, and to make sure that we are protecting human rights in this increasingly digital age, while also benefiting from all the wonderful things that these technological breakthroughs can deliver.
Well, I do agree. Like, if we put human in the center and human rights as a focus, we shall win anyhow, no matter how the technology will develop itself. However, like, looking on things more globally, as you mentioned, are different in each states, different in Europe, different in Asia, very different in Middle East, or even South America and Africa or Australia. Each continent have different approach to regulation, obviously, and have different challenges at the moment. And all over there, we do have different cities, but modern cities. Can a modern city not get involved in AI at this point? What would that look like? Do you have any examples?
It's a good question. And I'd start by saying, a few years ago, people realized, hey, every organization, every company is a technology company. There's no such thing as technology is not some vertical, and then we're all separate from it. Everyone's using technology. It's essential to what they do. Well, now AI is such a powerful suite of technologies that I think nobody can actually say they're in the future. No one will be able to say they're not an AI company, or they don't do AI, or they don't use AI, because doing that means you're going to go out of business, because some other companies that use it are going to be so much more efficient, faster, better, tailoring experience to what a user or a customer actually wants. And so people will simply gravitate towards the ones that use AI for their benefit, for their human benefit. Now, cities are different. Municipalities are different. There's typically only one government. So there's a government that's kind of got a monopoly on government services. And so they might be able to make by for a while in a way that a company couldn't simply ignore this important new trend, because there isn't really a competitor to take away their business. However, what those cities will lose is trust. They will lose trust over time. And once that trust degrades, I think you'll see, either people choosing not to live in that city, not to do business with that city, or you'll see some kind of significant upheaval in the political system in that community. The other thing I'd say is, when I talk about declining trust, it's already happened in a lot of places. A lot of places in Western Europe, in Central Europe, in the United States, if you look at the last few decades, there's a lot less trust in institutions like government than there used to be. And there are a variety of reasons for that. Some of them deserved, some of them maybe not so deserved. But you see this decline in trust. I think AI is actually a great opportunity for people to rebuild that trust. It's an opportunity to use it well as a city, as a government, to improve services, improve daily life. Again, health, education, the trash being picked up on time, the snow being plowed, the streets being clean, public transportation, meeting people's needs. All those things can be improved when we use artificial intelligence well. And so that's a way to build trust back after decades of slippage. So I think, can a modern city ignore AI? Not if they want to be a modern city. I think that's gonna lead to some amount of decline. This is not the first technological revolution that we've had in society, and it won't be the last. But what's different here is the speed. It's fast. And so this is why it's really important for everybody, whether they're a government or a private company, to think now about the choices they want to make, because this isn't going to take place. So here's an example. Mechanization of farming. This is 100 plus years ago in a lot of countries. Farms got mechanized. In the United States, which is the one I'm most familiar with, 50% of people used to work on farms. It's now 2%. It's 2%. And we don't have 48% unemployment. And we never did, because the change took place gradually over the course of decades. This change is not going to take decades. This change is going to take a fraction of that. And so we've got to think about, how do you retrain people, staff, government employees? How do you make sure that our education system is actually training the next generation to use these tools productively? This is something that when ChatGPT came out in early 2023, a lot of cities had this knee-jerk reaction to ban. A lot of school systems had this knee-jerk reaction where they said, no student is allowed to use ChatGPT. Very quickly, they realized that was completely untenable. They couldn't enforce it. The kids were going to use it anyway. But some cities, like Boston here in the United States, was much more thoughtful. And they said, look, this is the reality. This is a new set of tools. Sure, this is disruptive. This changes maybe how teachers need to teach or grade papers or things to look for. We need to set some rules in place for when it's appropriate to use this and how it's appropriate to use this. But an outright ban is silly, because these are the tools that this next generation of kids are going to be using day in and day out throughout their lives, in their workplaces, to be more productive, to do more. And so we actually want to encourage that. We want to encourage the use of these tools in ways that are appropriate, because they're powerful. People talk about, these are superpowers that people can now have, and we want to make sure those superpowers are used well. But we also don't want to deny them to people when they can really, really be a huge improvement in people's daily lives.
I don't think we can control it that much to deny it. However, this is interesting. Like from the tech point of view, is AI the end stage of technology? Do you find it to be a promised land yourself?
There are some people who are in some ways utopians, and they see this as kind of the holy grail, or there's almost like a messianic quality to it.
I wasn't saying that.
Yeah, I think there are people who do, though, and I think this is a breakthrough. There have been breakthroughs before, and I don't think this is something that will fundamentally change. I don't think this will change what's important in the human experience. I think people are going to continue to care about what they care about. They're going to care about family and community and happiness and fulfillment, and obviously safety, and those same issues that everyone cares about today are going to be the priorities for people. And these are new tools. These are new tools that can be used to help people achieve what they want in life. But there will be additional tools on the horizon. We already see quantum computing, for example, bioengineering. Sure. There are other things that will also capture our imagination, and some of them will fizzle out, and some of them will break through and be incredibly impactful. But I would say that now, and for the foreseeable future, it's hard to imagine a different suite of technologies impacting as many people and organizations and municipalities in as many important ways as artificial intelligence will.
Thank you very much. John, maybe a final question. Yeah, just going back to the cities, what kind of urban AI future would you like to see, and what would it take to get there, actually, in your opinion?
If people are interested in urban AI in particular, there is a great resource called the Global Urban AI Atlas. believe is what it's called. So if you look that up, the Global Urban AI Atlas. This was produced by some of the members of the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights, and it's an inventory of a bunch of the ways that cities around the world are using AI to, in many cases, improve lives today. Now, I think these regulatory questions that are being discussed now are going to be incredibly important to building that future that we want. So there are good things. There are these green shoots, like in springtime, that are blossoming and starting to come up, but we've got a long ways to go to make sure that these really grow into flourishing plants and forests that we want. And so what I'd like to see in urban AI is a solid regulatory framework that prioritizes people's rights. I don't want a world in which that power is overly centralized, because I think that being human-centric, person-centric, citizen-centric, resident-centric, I think that's the way to go. And if we do that, and if we're really thoughtful about ensuring that the tools are rolled out to address the highest priority issues that people face, that they're done in a way that's equitable and inclusive of everybody, and data that's representative of everybody's experiences, then I think we're on the precipice of something really wonderful, of the next generation of greatness of cities. I started this conversation talking about that book, The Triumph of the City. People have ruled out cities before. Just recently with the pandemic, there was a moment where people said, no one's going to live in cities anymore. They're all going to flee cities. Well, that hasn't happened. And here we are just a few years later, and we've got this incredible burst of activity where in the San Francisco Bay Area, which was a few years ago said to be, dead and dying, in New York City, which was said to be dead and dying. Those are the two largest hubs of AI activity, business growth, innovation in the world. Obviously not the only ones. There's work happening all over the globe. But I think these new tools will allow us to make urban life even more attractive, even better. And so as we move toward a world in which 3/4 of human beings live in cities, that city life is simply going to make them happier and healthier and better educated, wealthier, more empowered to live the kind of life they want to live. And I think to get there, in addition to good regulatory foundation upon which to build, I think we also should really think about how we share, because ultimately there are good ideas everywhere, and we want to make sure that those good ideas get to people in every city as quickly as possible. And I think that building the right kind of pathways for those relationships, those sharing, for conversations like this one between people in Poland and people in the United States, I think these are really important ways to ensure that we can all thrive together.
Right. Talking about sharing, thank you very much, John, on behalf of our community and Positive Tech, for sharing your experiences, your thoughts, and I think putting very interesting and inspiring focus on what do matter in AI. When everyone is talking about AI, there are things that matter more and less. But obviously, putting human in the center, that's very inspiring to me myself, and I take it as a key takeaway in terms of regulation and in terms of city development. So we do appreciate it. Thank you for having us, and really nice to connect.
Thanks so much. It's been great.
Okay, I think